With that, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 1 today. We're not going to be looking at an email, but at the Word of God, and just want to encourage you to dig into that today with us. The words will be on the screen. I have enjoyed over the last couple years getting to know people that I knew, but I didn't really know. And a lot of that's changed. Every once in a while, you might hear or see something happen here at church where I give somebody a hug and they're shocked by that. Has everybody ever witnessed me give somebody a hug and the person say like, "What? You're giving me a hug? What's happening? Is Christ returning?" And something like that, you know? It's because for years I did not hug. I didn't hug at all. And long story short, I used to be a hugger, and then there was a gentleman at church who was a very large man that always wanted to give me a hug. I'm 5'6". He was much taller than me and a little heavy. And inevitably, he would give me a hug. He would see other people hug me on Sundays. He'd give me a hug. And it was just the way he hugged and the height difference where every Sunday morning, my face was in his pit. And so it's not that I didn't like to hug people. It's just that I had to quit hugging people. Because this gentleman, if he saw somebody hug me, he would come over, and there's nothing worse than getting up to preach, and all you smell is deodorant the whole time, so or other things. It was just by necessity. That all changed with COVID. All right, not being able to be around people for a while, it just changed me, and I've enjoyed the last few years of being able to see people, hugging people, shake hands, I've enjoyed getting to know people in closer ways. And there's a lot of you here that have known me for a long time. And I mean, know. So I look out here, and obviously my wife is in the front row. I say obviously because obviously the pastor's wife sits in the front row. Or I might have meant obviously because there's a beautiful woman sitting in the front row, so obviously she would be my wife. But obviously, she knows me incredibly well. I look around this room, and over on this side are Nick and Kathy, and Kathy's one of my oldest friends. We've been friends since she was beating all the boys playing Stuck in the Mud in Whirlybirds in second grade. Nick has been a friend of mine since high school, and we've done missions trips and other weird things together. But over the last few years, I've gotten to know others of you in much closer ways. I have somebody here in this service who I was a teacher of mine. And for decades of my life, she was Mrs. Keeney. And no longer is she Mrs. Keeney. Now she is Judy. Why? Because she threatened me. I've gotten to know Judy over the last couple of years through text messages, through talking. And no longer is she, my former fourth grade teacher, but she's a friend. And I'm saying that because I enjoy getting to know people. And over this next year, we're going to be going through Genesis. Why? Because I believe that there is a God out there who knows us. He knows you better than anybody else. And I firmly believe that he can be known by us. Not just facts about him, not just philosophies and ideas, but to actually know him. And when we look at this, we're going to just start with Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to read the entire first chapter today. We're going to be able to dig into it at a certain level today, and on Wednesday night, we're going to dig in deeper. If you join us for our Wednesday night fellowship, we'll dig in much deeper, and it'll be more discussion and questions taking place. So if, as we study this today, there's a question that you have that I don't answer, there's a high probability I might answer it on Wednesday night, and there's an equal probability that I might not hear a thing you say to me on Wednesday night. And that's just because my ears are still plugged. But I'm just excited to be able to look at this. And when we read Genesis chapter 1, there's three main questions I want us to ask. One, what is this telling us? Two, how should we approach what it is telling us? And three, why does it matter at all what it's saying? All right? So what is this text telling us? How should we approach it? And why does it matter at all? Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." There was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. And the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Verse 11. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creepy crawlies on the ground according to its kind. And crawling was my addition, sorry. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heaven, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Incredibly famous passage, and even people who aren't Christians are familiar with at least the beginning of it, probably. This is something that has become incredibly controversial in our culture, and something that even within the church today, so many people have varying opinions about. So I will do my best today and on Wednesday to address different issues within this passage. But let's start with just the first question. What is this passage telling us? Well, let's go all the way back to verse 1. In the, what? Beginning. This passage tells us right off the bat that there was a beginning, that there was at some point a start to all of this. It would be easy for us to go ahead and, if we did not ever ask questions of our existence, to think that we were born, we live, we die, and that's just the way it has always been. But this passage right off the bat tells us that is not the way it has always been. That there was, in fact, a beginning to everything we see. There was a time before mankind. There was a time before the earth. There was a time before the cosmos. And one of the fascinating things about the Bible is that it starts with the beginning and it ends with a what? A new beginning. A new beginning. An end to everything we see, and then a new heaven and a new earth. Now remember, when we read this, that this is unlike any other thing you will read this week. This is unlike anything else you will read this week. You might be saying, well, of course he would say that because it's the Word of God. Yes, but think of it this way. Throughout this week, you'll do things like read newspapers. Some of you still read hard copies. Others of you will pick up an iPad or some other social media and read it on a screen. And what you read will be minutes old, hours old, or maybe just a day or two old. You might sit in a doctor's waiting room this week and be bored out of your mind and pick up one of those magazines that's sitting there. And have you ever asked the question, while you have to be in the doctor's office sitting there reading that magazine with your mask on, did they actually bother to sanitize that magazine? Ooh, let that one creep you out, right? You think about that, and that magazine you're reading is probably just a few months old, but what we just read is a text that is probably older than anything else you will read, not only this week, but in the next year or the next decade of your life. This is an ancient text. And it's going back saying that there was a beginning to all existence. And what it says predates any other things we're going to be looking at in this week. There was a beginning. What was before that? Well, we find it in the next word, God. In the beginning, God. This declares to us, and what it says is that there is a God who lives away out there, right? There is a God somewhere in this universe, a being that is more powerful and that is different and higher than we are. Pretty incredible when you think about it. There's such a huge debate that happens amongst people where there are people that we call atheists. They call themselves atheists. They'll identify by that to say there is no God out there. And right off the bat, it is in direct conflict with the entire Bible. Well, it is either that there is a God or there is not a God. And for most of us, we probably grew up in an educational situation where we were taught in the theory of evolution and that there is no God. Over the last 15 years, there's been more works in academia produced about atheism than probably any other time in human history. And yet, as many people are looking at evidence that they would say is scientific, growing in number are more and more people who would say there has to be a designer in some way, shape, or form. One of the things when we look at a passage like this is we're instantly drawn to all of the different arguments about it and whether or not there was a beginning, how it began, and if there was a God or a creator. And this passage, what Christianity is based on is that there is a beginning, there is a God, and that God is in fact the what? Creator. There is a creator. So that we didn't come from nothing. We came from something. And that something was from the thought of God himself. He created us. Now, I just want to say, if you want to get into the science of all this, there's a little bit of an issue here because this is not written in a scientific manner the way we would write science today for multiple reasons. One, it's from a different culture, and they write differently than we write. Two, the purpose isn't to give a scientific experiment on here. This is a narrative that's written in an ancient Eastern language, and it's a story that is telling us something. It's a journey that it's taking us on. But if we do want to get into that, we can look at this and we can just say that where many of us were taught in evolution that man evolved over millions of years, that there was a big bang. At one time, there was matter, and then that matter exploded, and suddenly it took shape into life, and God did not have anything to do with it. A lot of that doesn't take into more recent scientific exploration that we have. I just, even this morning, got up early and I was listening to Stephen Meyer, Dr. Stephen Meyer, give a lecture on intelligent design, and he was digging into the facts about DNA. More and more scientists are looking at evolutionary theory and saying it is a mess, it is impossible when you consider how incredibly intricate and beautiful life is. DNA, the studies in DNA have blown apart so much of what we have believed in the past. And there's a growing field of scientists that look at this, and they might not be saying, well, yes, there is a God, and his name is Jesus Christ, and he died on the cross and, lived his life 3 days later, then he rose from the dead and now is in heaven. But they are saying we were designed. We've at least gotten that far. Absolutely amazing. There's other theories and ideas out there that they come into conflict with the idea of us being millions of years old. If you want to watch some good documentaries on this kind of stuff, one that I would highly suggest is one called Is Genesis History? Maybe you've ever seen that documentary or heard it. All right. Who's the nerd in the house? Me. Is Genesis History? Go back and you can look that up online and watch it. It's only about 5 years old. And it absolutely amazes me, the scientists and the geologists that are in that documentary and what they explain. It's fascinating because they go to a place on Earth and they show how this place was absolutely destroyed at one point in time, and they explain how long it took for life to begin to start to sort of sprout back up in this region of the earth. And it's an area where most geologists and scientists would say that took millions of years, but it's an area that we are familiar with very well because it's Mount St. Helens. And they start out just showing like what has happened here over the last few decades is something that the majority of geologists say should have taken millions of years. They go through evidence after evidence after evidence. Brothers and sisters, I just want to encourage you, if you're here today and you have been told one thing in classrooms, and maybe you're a big fan of Nova and OPB and the History Channel, to maybe begin to consider that there are other ideas that are incredibly plausible of how we were created. I love this passage. It tells us directly that there was a beginning. The beginning, God was there, we weren't, but we came into existence because He created us. And not just us, everything around us. Now, some people will try to wed the two ideas together. On one hand, the idea that there is not a God and there is a Big Bang evolutionary process that took place. Or if you're like me, somebody who takes this literal and says there is a God and He created everything in existence in just 6 days and rested on the seventh. Somewhere in the middle are a lot of Christians that try to wed the two together. Try to wed things together. One of the most popular ways to do that is a lot of pastors and theologians will look at Genesis chapter 1 and will say, this is poetry. It's pure poetry. So you can't take it for what it literally says right here because it's poetic form. I'm not an incredible Hebrew scholar by any means. By any means. I one day had coffee with an incredible Hebrew scholar. He had a PhD in ancient Mesopotamic languages and taught at Wheaton College in Illinois. And after we were done having coffee, we were standing outside on the sidewalk at Gwen's, and we were saying bye, and I said, oh, hey, can I ask one more question? And he goes, yeah, sure, what? I said, I was just reading a famous pastor, and I read his apologetics book, and he talked about Genesis chapter 1. It kind of confused me because I've always taken it that it was narrative, but he said, no, it's poetry, so it doesn't actually mean what it says. Have you ever asked a person a question and they sort of get triggered that fast? Oh, yeah. This professor got triggered that fast, and he just got on a roll. The first thing out of his mouth was like, I don't know why so many pastors are trying to say that, and he just went off. I was standing there for like 15 minutes. Again, it was one of those things where he lost me that fast in how we started going in. He was talking about ancient Mesopotamic languages, the way that they wrote their ancient narratives and all this stuff. And basically what I gathered from him is, no, it's not poetry, it's a narrative. Which is the way it was always taught up until just really a few minutes ago. Really a few minutes ago. Why? Because we have a tendency to want to look at things that we are taught in life and try to fit the Bible to it rather than us fitting our lives to the Bible. What's your paradigm for reading the Bible? And can I just say this? When you look at this, if you're struggling to understand, like, did God really speak everything into existence and create it in 6 days? Well, I mean, I can't fathom that. Well, what else in the Bible are you going to take as not literal? What else? Was there a parting of the Red Sea, or was there not? Was there a burning bush that Moses talked to, or was there not? Was there an angel of death that passed over houses of people that had the shed blood of a lamb on the doorpost? We just finished Christmas. I have never taken a biology class that taught me that a virgin woman who was human could give birth to a child. I suppose there's probably a class out there where it might be acceptable to say you identify as a virgin woman, right? But are you literally a virgin woman, right? I just look at this, and does science say that somebody who is crucified on a cross, buried in a tomb, can 3 days later have angels show up, roll away the stone in front of the tomb, raise themselves from the dead, and suddenly start appearing to people? Where do you draw the lines? Years ago, I met with several pastor friends of mine, and we were talking about Genesis chapter 1, and we were debating the science back and forth because all of them were evolutionists that tried to make this passage fit into evolutionary theory. And one of them said, "You seem kind of passionate about this, and you've studied a lot, but why? What's the big deal? I mean, it's really just a secondary issue. It's not a matter of salvation." And this is what I said. I was like, look, I look at the Bible like a beautiful tapestry. And there's organization to it. It's trying to, in this beautiful way, tell me something. And yet you just walked up to it and said, "I don't like that thread right there, so I'm going to pull it out." What happens to a tapestry if you pull a thread out? It starts to slowly, or sometimes quickly, unravel. And what's to stop that same person from going to any other part of the Bible and saying, "Well, now I don't like that part either. And now I don't like this part. And in fact, not only do I not like that part, but I think I should sew it back in this way." If you do that with Genesis, you can do it with any other part of the Bible. So we get to the end of Genesis, and God created them male and female. And next week, we'll talk about that. Literally, there was I just watched an interview with a transgender Anglican pastor, the first transgender Anglican pastor, who took that very passage and said that this was a man who was married and had a family, and one morning got up and looked at that and the same passage, and God created them male and female, and said, "Oh, look at that. He went from a male to a female. So it must be okay." And reinterpreted a passage that way. If you can do that with this, you can do it with any part of the Bible. So just know this. You're walking on dangerous water. Very dangerous water. I might say this too. When you're interpreting something like this, remember at the beginning of this sermon, I said that this is an ancient book. The original readers who read this, would they have looked at this and said, "You know, Moses, this is great the way you wrote it. And I know that you said God created 6 days, but really, I know you meant millions of years. I know that there was this process that some guy's going to come up with thousands of years from now." No. We try to read it through our lens rather than the lens of the audience it was written for. And again, if you do that with any part of the Bible, you can make it say whatever is the most comfortable for your cultural setting. What does this tell us? God created. He created the heavens and the earth, and that there was a beginning. How should we approach this? I don't think you can read Genesis chapter 1 without considering Job chapter 38. Job chapter 38, there's actually a debate amongst theologians of what the oldest book of the Bible is. Some say it's Genesis, others say it's Job. Which one is it? I don't know. Why? I wasn't there when either of them were written. I'm not yet 50, right? But they're both really old, ancient books, ancient writings. Job is set up in such a way, and if you know the story, where you have Job, who was a righteous man, and yet he is afflicted, he is tested, he loses his, I was going to say his wife. He doesn't lose his wife. She's nagging at him. He loses all of his kids, all of his riches, his house, he loses his health, all in one day, right? It's just like one bad thing after another. His wife is telling him, this is your fault. He sits on a pile of ashes with a piece of a broken pot, scratching the boils that are all over his body. While 4 of his friends, we know there's 4, but at first, for most of the book, you only think there's 3, are there giving him advice. Job is a book that's full of wisdom. Each one of his friends talks from the perspective of a theologian, a philosopher. They have great wisdom, and most of what you read them say, you would be looking at saying like, wow, this person is like talking, and they're like Confucius, they're like Yoda, they're like somebody who's just full of wisdom, right? So each one of his friends talks, and at the end, Job then responds, and that cycle happens 3 different times. They're all trying to say, Job, all this has happened to you because you have this sin in your life or that sin in your life. And eventually, Job gets to the place where he has enough, and he gets heated, and he starts to vent, and out of it you see Job is prideful about his righteousness. In Job 38, God talks to Job. It's one of my favorite parts of the Bible. Literally. I mean it this time. He says, then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. It's literally in Hebrew says, gird yourself for action, Job, like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. In the modern Timology department, we just read that like, Job, time to put on your big boy pants. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely, Job, you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut the sea with the doors when it burst forth from the womb? When it made clouds its garment and made darkness, thick darkness, its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come, no further. You shall not pass. And here shall your proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It is changed like the clay under the seal, and its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked their light is withheld, and their uplifted arm is broken. Job, have you entered the springs of the sea, or walked the recesses of the deep ocean? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Declare it, if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness, that you may take it to its territory, and that you may discern the paths to its home? You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. It goes on, and I could keep reading. Man, God is so sassy and sarcastic in this passage, right? You look at this, and it's just like, wow. This is how God created. We try to put everything into terms that we can understand. Do you really think you can understand the cosmos? About 10 years ago, Ben Stein had a documentary called Expelled, where he interviewed the leading atheists in our world. And at the end of his documentary, he asked every single one of them a simple question. Okay, so there was no life, and then there was life, right? Every one of them said, yeah, right. Okay, no life, and then there was life. Yeah. How did that happen? Well, what do you mean? Like, okay, there was no life, and then there was life. How do we get from here? How did that happen? Their answers were things like ancient aliens. There were crystals somewhere, and they emitted stuff, and there was no life, but then all of a sudden we had life because life happened on the backs of crystals. The reality is they weren't there, and they don't know. And God is saying to Job, okay, obviously you're smart enough, you tell me. And I look at this like in creation story, it is amazing what you see here because there are things like this. You look at the first 3 days of creation and the second 3 days of creation, and it doesn't compute with everything I know. God created light, right? He spoke it to existence. But it wasn't until the third day that he created the sun, the moon, and the stars. So instantly, people look at it and are like, well, this is impossible. You can't have that. The only reason it's impossible for us to understand that is because that's all we've ever known. We can't imagine what it would be like to have light without the sun, the moon, and the stars. But according to Scripture, God created light, and then later he created the sun, the moon, and the stars to govern the light. Fascinating when you get to Revelation and you look at the new heaven and the new earth. There is no sun. There is no sun. The light that we have comes directly from God himself. Does light only happen from the sun? No. If you want to know more of that, come to second service, introduce yourself to Dave Baratich, and talk to him about light. He'll lose you about that fast because he spent his life studying light. It's absolutely amazing. There's so much more to light than just simply, we wake up, the sun sheds light. There's so much more to it than that. We are talking about a God who created outside of the sphere of our understanding. Even the whole idea of space and time, I can't understand what it's like to be outside of that. How many of you ever watched the movie or the TV show Heroes? A few other nerds in the house. All right. Wait, keep your hand up. If you watched Heroes, keep your hand up. Everyone look at the people with their hand up. Would you applaud them right now for being brave enough to admit that? Oh my goodness. It only came in 3 different families in our church. Wow. Here's the deal. I won't even go there. I'll say that for Wednesday night. I'll save this for Wednesday night. Okay. What does this tell us? That God created everything we see. How should we approach this? Brothers and sisters, be humble and have faith. Be humble. Because you don't know. Your scientific experiments can't figure it all out, and neither can that person with a lot of degrees behind their name. None of us were there. So I'm taking the word of someone who was. And why does it matter? If you look at the first 4 words of Genesis 1, the first 4 words of the Bible, they're really important. In the beginning, God. But which God and who is he? That word there, you're trained, if you've been around church, to instantly see God and instantly think, oh, that's talking about Yahweh. It's talking, we know, like from the Trinity and stuff, like Christ is involved and stuff like that. The word there has nothing to do with that. It is just a general word that is there, Elohim. When that was written, there were all kinds of Elohim, God, or sometimes we also translate it little G-O-D-S, gods. Notice this doesn't tell us who he is. Remember I said that Genesis is a narrative. Actually, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy originally were one book, and it was all a narrative designed to tell us who this God was. So why are we going to go through all of Genesis? Because what we find at the beginning of Genesis is this: there's some spirit being out there who created. In the next chapter, we're going to get a little bit more information about who this God is. And as we move through Genesis, we're going to discover he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And as he interacts with them, we're going to get to know more about his personality. And the cool thing is I've already read the rest of the story so that I get to other places in the Bible where I read this and I find out more about who this is. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He, in the beginning, was with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What we find when we read through the Bible is this narrative that tells us about who our Creator God is, and he's not just distant. He doesn't have just an ambiguous title. He has a name, and he is here with us today, and he wants you to know him. Not just to know about him, but to be able to walk with him and talk with him in an incredible way through his word, by his Holy Spirit, in his church and in his world. Brothers and sisters, you were created in his image, and your Creator knows you better than anybody else, and he wants you to know him in new and refreshing ways.